Hey, so I ended my last video with the very important question, is it ever okay to sexually abuse a child? And the answer is, according to Jehovah's Witnesses, yeah, so long as you don't get caught. So before I jump into the actual content for this video, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who has been so amazingly supportive. I actually hit 100 subscribers, which I never would have thought. Like I said, I don't even have a Facebook, and I'm fairly new to YouTube. I noticed in every video I forget those magic words to remind you to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Clearly I wasn't a very good Jehovah's Witness because I am a terrible salesperson. Okay, so let's just jump right into what Jehovah's Witnesses will not tell you. This is part 2, and this is specifically directed to anyone who's currently studying with Jehovah's Witnesses, or even those who have been out for a while and are maybe thinking about going back, and this is a little reminder as to why you should not. If you missed the first part of my video, or the first video in this series, I'll put a link to it below. But this one is a fairly important one. Yes, if nothing else, you're going to want to remember this one and hold tightly to it. What Jehovah's Witnesses will not tell you when you're studying with them is about a little rule called the two-witness rule. And what that basically means is anytime anyone does anything that's breaking a rule, legal or just a Jehovah's Witness policy, that you can't actually get in trouble if there's not a second witness to see you doing it. Now this is beneficial in some ways, because if there isn't a second witness, you didn't do it. Where it's very detrimental is in the case of child sexual abuse. If there isn't a second witness, it never happened. So if you are studying with the witnesses and you are thinking about going to a meeting, I'm going to tell you firsthand, and I'm going to tell you some experiences I've had firsthand. No matter what they tell you, because they will tell you that this information is not true, Jehovah's Witnesses, require that second witness. So when you take your daughter or your son to the Kingdom home, be prepared that you will probably be sitting them next to a pedophile. Now, I'm certainly not saying that all witnesses are pedophiles, not by far. But what I can tell you is that the pedophiles that are within the congregation, no one else in the congregation is told about it, and B, even if they are found guilty, the authorities are not notified. So this person is walking around free, and even if they do get caught or confess, they get their privileges back, they can work their way back into the congregation. It's a forgivable sin. They look at it as a sin. It's not a crime. So that's something to remember. So yes, when you are bringing your child to the meeting, which nowadays I guess is just twice a week, so you're only exposing them twice a week as opposed to when I was a kid and it was 3 to 4 times a week. These brothers and sisters that you think are really, really nice, they think your daughter's really, really nice too. Well, isn't she just wearing the cutest little dress? It's not the dress that they're looking at. I've had 3 experiences in the Jehovah's Witness religion, if you'd like to call it that, and I'm going to share them with you and the outcomes. So the first time that I was abused, I really don't remember my exact age. I was fairly young. It was the son of an elder. He had, I think, 3 kids, 2 sons and a daughter. The daughter was older. The younger son was friends with my brother, so we would go over there for fellowship, thinking everything is perfectly wonderful and safe. And his oldest son, whose name was Freddie, and this would have taken place in Las Vegas, Nevada, in the Desert View congregation, if anyone is listening. And if there is Fred or Freddie who's approximately my age, actually about 6 or 7 years older than me, so somewhere around 50. Could be older, like I said, I'm not 100% sure of how old he was. It could have been 16 to 18. Listen, when you're as young as I was, everybody over the age of 11 looks like a grown-up. So yes, if you happen to be in the Desert View congregation area in Las Vegas, Nevada, and that name sounds familiar, I'd guard my kids if I were you. We would go over to the house, and he was very, very good at getting us alone. Everyone knew that he was hanging out with me, which is kind of strange that, let's say he was 17, I'll go with a middle ground of age, that they would think it was normal that he would not, no one had to insist that he entertain me, but he went out of his way. So he would play a little game. Hey, let's pick a number from 1 to 10 for who could stay in the house and got to play in the room. My brother and his brother, and where he and I would go or get to stay and play in the room. And clearly he set it up very nicely. Whatever number they picked was the right number every time. That left us to go hang out in the garage. And you know, looking back, especially when you're an adult and you can see around corners and you can see the big picture of things, he was very practiced at this. I clearly was not the first person that he had done this with. So he had his games laid out that really made me feel like I was kind of steering the direction. So like he would pull out, let's say, a deck of cards, and I'm sure that was even set up as to which card I picked, and I would pick a king. And he would go, oh, K is for car. K isn't for car, but okay. So we're driving in a car, and we're married. And the game would kind of go from there. So I can tell now, in looking back, I clearly was not the first person that he had done this with. And he would proceed in these games. I just thought of something. He would proceed in these games to molest me or to have me, and I hate just using the word touch because it was a lot more than that. He was very kind afterwards to let me use some clean handy wipes from his dad's garage, which he called perfume because they smelled so good. Clearly he had been doing this for a while. I wasn't the only one. At some point, he did get caught, and he was laying on top of me on the ground outside of his sister's window. It's very blotchy for me, and I will tell you, a lot of my memories are blotchy between a lot of the abuse that I suffered and the fact that I was raised in a religion full of brainwashing and doesn't allow you to think for yourself, that does definitely have a lot of gaslighting. What I do remember was the relief when I heard her say, Freddie, get off of her. I wasn't sure what was going to happen, obviously. I knew what he was doing so far wasn't feeling really great, but I didn't know what to do. And so she said, Freddie, get off of her. And then she said something along the lines of, you told mom and dad you wouldn't do this anymore, or you told mom and dad you would stop. It was something that indicated to me that A, his parents knew, B, she knew. There was obviously conversation about it, that he said he would stop. It was clear that it was public knowledge in their household. So that told me that he had been caught before. There had to have been at least one other victim, which I doubt. It seemed to me, again, like this was something he was used to doing. I wasn't the only one. And what really bothers me is that in knowing that and putting the pieces together and knowing that this had occurred before, nobody had told us. I mean, my parents would not have taken us over to someone's house if they thought that we were in danger, if they thought that while they were inside laughing it up and the boys are playing, that I'm going to be outside learning how to give hand jobs. They would not have brought us there. So, amongst other things. So, yeah, I didn't say anything. I guess I thought when his sister said that obviously she would run inside and tell her parents, right? And maybe she did. And then you would assume that from there that they would tell my parents, and then we would go and talk to people in the church. So you got to remember this: the steps I'm going through are the steps you would go through if you're a Jehovah's Witness. As a worldly person, you would go to the police, but that's just not the way it is when you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses. So, so I've assumed that she had told the parents would tell my parents, but I never heard anything. No one said anything to me. I don't know, I thought about it once in a while over time, and it just never came out. Now, sometime later, and I really don't remember how old I was, I told my mom about it. And she and I are just kind of rebuilding our relationship right now, due to a lot of things. The church is definitely one of them. So I haven't asked her. I want to ask her exactly when did I tell her, because I know it's common knowledge later. We would talk about it all the time. In our family, unfortunately, we tend to joke a lot about serious matters, and that's a coping mechanism. So there was a lot of jokes regarding the family or that situation, but I don't remember when I initially told her. One of my main points is that, granted, you might be thinking, well, you didn't say anything, therefore we don't know if the authorities would have been notified or not. We don't know if he would have been disfellowshipped or not. But what I'm telling you is that he was already actively doing this. I mean, I can tell you now, just with the scope of my experience, not just as a victim in multiple situations for years as a child, but as a grown person, and then the basic psychology of the situation and the people involved. Clearly he had been doing this, and again, nobody told us. So his father, being an elder, knew. If there was other victim, which I'm assuming that's how the whole family came to know, as other victim came forward. And whether or not there was any kind of punishment, I don't know. What I do know is that no one in the congregation was told, and therefore we went over there all the time. His brother was my brother's best friend. So I definitely think and wonder, because I would be abused more times by two individuals that I remember. And I wondered if this particular situation didn't set me up for when the other situations occurred, that maybe to me, I just, in my child's head, thought that this was normal. And so it was already damaging to that point that because nobody said anything, I didn't know that it was wrong. Or even when I felt that it was wrong, the message you kind of receive when you live what you learn, and you learn what you live, is I had learned that you don't say anything. So there was that first incident. Now the second incident was definitely much, much more severe. I was looking at pictures lately and trying to figure out where timelines were and how old I was at certain times. And so I want to say that I was somewhere between 6 and 8 years old. I know I wasn't older than 8, but I could have been as young as 6 when this occurred, with a family member who was also a Jehovah's Witness. We lived in California at this point. So my parents started out in Nevada, and eventually we moved to California, and we lived with my dad's brother, and he turned out to be the family pedophile. And it turns out that people in the family knew, and nobody spoke of it. I do want to note, these were not other Jehovah's Witnesses. But in any case, he had been abusing myself and my two sisters, one that he was raising. It's a very complicated story, but my oldest sister lived with him and his wife, and then it's really complicated. But so is my two sisters and I. I vaguely remember other little kids being around, but I don't remember who they were, and I can't put names to people, especially that long ago. But in any case, he had been abusing us for some time. The physician reports later on, I mean, I thought that I had it bad. The physician reports later on would reveal that my sister, who was 2 years younger than me, was much more damaged. So we actually did have physical evidence, but I'll come to that. So anyhow, one day my aunt had caught us in the hall and had said, again, I always make that slip, caught us. I wasn't doing anything wrong. She caught him abusing me. And her words were, Cassie, get away from him. Like I had a whole lot of choice. So Cassie, get away from him. And I kind of scurried out of his arms and I went outside to play. And sometime later he was appearing at the front door and like waving me over. And me and my sister and my mom were the only white kids. Oh, my aunt, his wife, was white too, but she was fluent in Spanish and very much adapted to that culture. But so he was beckoning me over in Spanish and telling me, and I just stood there and I kept kind of shaking my head no, which you always do, but he's gonna get you anyways. And he kept saying, no, it's okay. No, it's okay. Come over here. And so you kind of get stuck because you don't want to get in trouble for not listening to an adult, right? Being disobedient. And then you know what's going to happen if you do be obedient. And so it's a shitty position to be in. He had said something about, he had called out to me that my tia, that my aunt wanted to talk to me. Well, I couldn't risk that being, true, and then I'm disobeying her. So I went inside, she sat down, and it was a really pathetic apology. She was literally prodding him. Tell her you're sorry. He's going, yeah, I'm sorry. Tell her you won't do it again. I mean, she's literally prodding, and he's just like, yeah, it's really wrong. And so it was this pathetic apology that I received. And never gonna happen again. And, she hugged me. She was a very loving woman. Clearly has her own mental problems, that this was just how she handled it. And she was upset and, said, it's not going to happen again. And that was it. I was sent out to play, and about an hour later, he caught me in the backyard and was back at it again. So he wasn't very sincere, it turns out. Imagine that. So she didn't tell my parents. It took a second time, and I don't even remember the incident of the second time. But I'm going to tell you, this man was, he was an aggressive pedophile. It didn't matter. He could molest you right there with family around. He had balls. Didn't matter if you were sleeping, didn't matter if there's other people in the room, and he was very, very aggressive about it. And he just had free reign pretty much around the congregation. And actually, what's funny is an article was written by the Watchtower and Awake about him and my dad, my Aunt Jean, and another female who were all ex-bikers. And it's a 1980 Wake. I have the actual volume still. But if you have a chance to go to jw.org, and maybe if I remember, I will also put a link to that. And it was their transition from being bikers in a gang called Satan's Slaves. And if you want to just Google it, you can Google Satan's Slaves, jw.org, and it comes right up. And they had just done an article in 1980. I think it was, I want to say it was the September 22nd edition. I think the cover had hell on it or something, is hell real or something. And so the time period that I'm now referencing when he was abusing people was 1983, 84. It could have been 82, but I know it was 83-ish, ending in 84, because I believe that's when we moved. But they had done an article on him and how wonderful it was that he was just such, a soft-spoken, dedicated Jehovah's Witness. And he even referenced, and this is what's interesting, is he even referenced in that article that he was on probation for his past criminal activity and was getting off of probation in 1983. And the reason I point that out is because he had a record. And can you imagine how much harder that gavel would have come down on him if it was reported that he was raping and sexually abusing little children, and he's still on probation. That just would have amplified any kind of sentencing he would have had. But of course, that never happened. What basically happened is that my aunt told my parents moved us out of there. I feel like we might have moved to another house temporarily, because I have memories of being in another home before we ended up moving to Arizona. They talked to the elders. He was disfellowshipped. And when that happens, you can lose your privileges, which means shame on you for touching that little girl's vagina. You're not allowed to answer at the meetings anymore, and you can't pass around the microphones. And I hope you've learned your lesson, young man. So sometimes that happens, and sometimes they're disfellowshipped, which means they just announce to everyone, this person is no longer a member of, they actually say the word is being disfellowshipped, but they never tell anyone why, so no one is warned. And they did not tell the authorities. And I have a very, very vague recollection of my mom having conversation of what would occur if they did tell the authorities, and that it would mean I would have to say all of these embarrassing things in front of a bunch of people and in front of a judge, and I would have to talk about the details. I remember there being talk about, we don't want to bring shame on Jehovah, and I would like to say that she had asked me what I wanted to do, but I really don't think that's the case. I think I wish she had asked me. I'm sure if I had this conversation with her, she'd have her own version of it. But in any case, it wasn't reported. And this man was relentless. I will tell you, sometime later when we were at a convention, my sister and I, he was disfellowshipped still, his wife stayed with him. We had no contact with him at all at that point. But we were going to a convention in California, and for some reason we were sitting near him. And we knew we were going to California ahead of time, and my sister and I, we would talk about like, oh, if we see him, F him, we're not afraid of him anymore. I mean, we really had ourselves built up like badasses. Like, we were so grown since those incidences that, like, we would take him down. And so we find ourselves at the convention, and he was wearing, he had a serape wrapped around him, which is like a Mexican blanket, and he was just sitting in that the whole time, and we were like, just talking mad shit. Eyeballing him, like, just, oh, I dare him to turn. Oh, if he turns around, I'm gonna flip him off. And of course, none of these things would we do in front of our parents, because then we'd get in trouble, for being mean to our pedophile. So we were out in the middle of the convention, and there's a ton of people around, and he's here, and he is welcome here. And all of these little kids, I mean, I look back now at these kids that are in their cute little dresses, which are easy access. And it's basically a smorgasbord for a pedophile. And as overt as he was, I'm sure he was hands-on. I mean, to him, it was like child porn for 4 days. But in any case, we saw him walking towards us, and we were like, is he coming this way? Is that him? Yeah, that's him. Is he coming this way? And he's walking, and as he's getting closer and closer, he's walking faster and faster, and he literally breaks out into a run, whips up his serape like a crazy bat person, runs towards us, and then dodges us at the last minute. Our whole plan of screw you to him did not work. We literally, you never seen a couple of kids grip each other so fast, literally freeze in terror, and I'm surprised we didn't shit ourselves. I mean, mentally we did. It was horrifying, and it was right in the middle of the convention where all of these brothers are begging him and wanting on a regular basis, please come back and join us, brother. Please, we miss you, They want so badly for these disfellowship people to come back, whether they're a pedophile or not. So, never was reported. The third incident, and I want to make sure I'm not leaving anything out. I have all these plans in my head when I'm preparing to do a video. I'm not one to like read things or notes because, and then I also tend to go off on tangents. I'm afraid I'm forgetting something really important, or if anything, something sarcastic that can at least kind of lighten the matter a little bit, which I know that it's not a light matter, but, on a lighter side, he did God, years and years and years and years later, get colon cancer. Prostate cancer, that's what it was. He got prostate cancer. And all of us, even my brothers who had learned about what he was like later, that gave us a good laugh. Yes, pedophile getting prostate cancer. Awesome. Unfortunately, he survived. So anyhow, and one of these days I'll probably do a video about how I confronted him, because I think it's important to all victims of abuse to have that moment if they so desire it, but that's another video. And the third time that I was abused, I was much older, I would say 13 or 14. I had been abused off and on by this person. This is a sad way to put it. I can't always put faces to hands, so I don't want to make accusations to people if I'm not 100% clear as to who did what. The way I explained it to my mom years ago, 20, 30 so years ago, was that it's hard to tell where one set of hands ended and another set of hands began. And that's sad, but that is the reality, and I'm still here. So this particular person, I know that there was off and on abuse throughout time. By the time I was 14, he had been messing with me. I immediately told my mother, and we took it to the elders again, because they have the authority. And they talked to me, they talked to him, they talked to my mom. I remember being out in the main hall with him, which was very uncomfortable. I just was, God, so uncomfortable. And I can tell you in these meetings when they talk to you, whether you're a little tiny 5-6-year-old or a 40-year-old woman who's been raped, that they want details. They want to know how he touched your vagina. Was it light? Was it hard? Did you enjoy it? Was he making sounds? Did you make any sounds? I mean, it's very, 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 very detailed, way too graphic for anything I'm willing to put out here. And it's awful. And you're saying this to 3 grown men who are asking all these questions, probably taking notes for later in their own personal time. I'm not saying that all elders are pedophiles, but their sex lives are pretty blinded, and they probably learned more in those back rooms about what you can do with a clitoris than they ever learned in like a 20-year marriage. So in this particular incident, he was not disfellowshipped. He did lose his privileges as a ministerial servant. And again, I go back to it's a horrible punishment. You can't answer at meetings, or you can't help counsel people anymore because you're a pedophile. It's a small price to pay. Apparently to them it's a huge price to pay. And again, in this situation, the authorities were not notified. So I am basically trying to unveil a little bit more about me and my personal situation in order for you, the person studying with Jehovah's Witnesses, to know these things actually happen. And the children are not protected. I basically have given you 3 different people in 3 different congregations in 3 different states, right? Arizona, California, and Nevada. And while my first incident, I did not tell my parents, but he did get caught. Nobody had previously reported the abuse he was doing to other kids in order to protect me. In the second incident, myself, I had 2 siblings that were witnesses, and my aunt was a witness, and that's actually the only reason that they even pursued taking action against him within the congregation. If I had come forth, and I'm going to tell you this about your own children, if I had come forth on my own and said I'm being abused, and they will ask the person, are you sexually abusing this child? If they say no, that's it. Their hands are washed. They have to have 2 witnesses. If you come forth and say, hey, mommy, this man was having sex with me in front of a couple of my cousins and 2 of my friends, All right, then you got some witnesses. But we all know how often that happens. In my third situation, the person that I accused actually immediately confessed. So that's why he lost his privileges. I don't know why he wasn't disfellowshipped. I don't know why they made that decision. I don't know any of that. I know, again, it wasn't reported. And that's basically what you can expect. This is what you're taking your kids into. And so I'm telling those of you who are currently studying, you can't say, if you go in and something happens to your kids, you can't say you didn't know. Myself and so many others who are out there either writing about it, vlogging about it, speaking on it. There are so many others out there that you can't say you didn't know. You can't say, well, this is an isolated incident. You can't say, well, it only happened in one congregation. You can't say, well, this has been distorted. I'm going to tell you very directly, the abuse that I went through, I have so minimized for this video because I wouldn't put those kind of details about myself out into the internet. And also because at least 4 of my kids that I know of are my subscribers, and while they're aware of some of the things that I experienced, I'm not here to put kind of images like that into people's heads. So yeah, you've been warned, and I highly encourage you. You can ask the person you're studying with if this occurs. I would recommend also, look up the Australian Royal Commission. Look at the settlements that have happened in California. Look at the lawsuits, and my brain is completely fried. I want to say Montana. Class action lawsuit going on in Canada. You can look any of these things up. You can look up individual people's stories. And if you ask the witnesses, and I will tell you, I have a witness that comes to my house. That's where I try to get a lot of my information from. And she's a nice lady. And my thing is, I'm always hoping that I plant something with her. But when I told her my story, she was jaw dropped. And the first thing she said was, oh my God, no, that doesn't happen anymore. In fact, we've paid out millions to victims. And she made it seem like it was voluntary, as if victims were coming up and being compensated for their pain and suffering. And that's not the case. They're settling out of court is what the witnesses are doing, and they're losing lawsuits. So they're settling and they're losing. And a lot of people are contributing money to the Watchtower and Tract Society, that our witnesses are unaware that this money that they're contributing is being used to settle and to hide and protect the Watchtower and Tract Society. And it is the governing body that directs these elders. Do not go to the police. I know that they go when it's required in their state, but if it's not required, the governing body tells them, you call us up at the headquarters and we will advise you. And the advice is not to report it to the authorities. I'm telling you this firsthand. There's a ton of stories out there that you can check into for yourself. But when I asked this woman, or told her, and she insisted, we don't do it that way anymore. And in fact, she kind of went into a little bit like defensive. We absolutely say anything. We come forth with it now. The rules have changed since you were here. I mean, we 100%, make sure that the authorities are notified. And at the time I was talking to her, I hadn't done a whole lot of research, so I was like, oh, that's cool. But then she made a slip, because in her defense, she was saying, even my husband, who's an elder, he's an elder, and last week, he had to make an anonymous phone call to report a case of child abuse, a case of child sexual abuse. What happened? My video cut out, so there's going to be some weird transitioning here to the ending of my piece. My question to her was, if the governing body supports you reporting it to the police, then why is it anonymous? You make an anonymous call when you're trying to hide something or you don't want to get caught. You don't want people to find out. If the governing body wants you to tell the authorities, why is it anonymous? It doesn't make any sense. So it was clear to me that while her heart might be in the right place and she's thinking, well, he said something, making an anonymous phone call means you're hiding something. And what you're probably hiding in this case is you're hiding from the governing body and your elders that you made this phone call. You felt compelled to make this phone call. But if they knew he made this phone call, it probably wouldn't go over too well for him. So that little slip of verbiage, that's why I always tell you, listen to what they're saying, little words here and there, little terms, little phrases that will really give themselves away. And while I'm sure in her heart she thinks that child abuse should be reported, and maybe her husband feels the same way, and that's why he was compelled to make this anonymous call, they don't speak for themselves. They don't stand for themselves. They have to stand for what the bigger picture is, and that's the governing body and the Watchtower and Tract Society. So as much as they want to do what is right, they're in an organization that is more concerned with protecting themselves, their reputation, getting members, not having any bad news or anything that can possibly smudge their reputation. So this video turned out a little bit longer than I expected. So that being said, I'm letting those of you out there who are studying with Jehovah's Witnesses know you're putting your children in danger. And I hope you think twice about it. You don't have to tell them you're not going anymore. Just don't answer your phone. You don't have to be aggressive if you're more of an introverted person. You have the right in this life to do what you choose, what you want. And you can simply just stop having communication if you are too uncomfortable to have those conversations. But if you have those conversations, be prepared. They're going to deny, deny, deny. And I'm telling you, granted, my stories are many years old. But if you look at what's currently happening in the news, you'll see that it's still occurring. Nothing's changed. So, with that being said, one thing I noticed I failed to do in every video is to remind you to subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this. I promise it's not all this dark. I do have another video coming up continuing what Jehovah's Witnesses won't tell you. I'd say it's a little bit lighter content. Just as important, because lies are lies, and what they're not telling you is withheld information, and that's the same as a lie. But yeah, subscribe, like the video, hit the notification bell if you'd like to know when I upload. It's usually once a week on Tuesdays if I'm not running behind. But again, I appreciate everyone's support, and I have felt very encouraged continuing to make these videos, and a lot of the messages that I'm receiving, I gotta say, especially from people who are still in and are starting to research and are really taking advantage of the information that's now on the internet. And if you're somebody who's out, if you're somebody who's half out, and you ever think about, maybe talking about it, I definitely encourage you, to get out there, make a couple of videos, because one group of people may not listen to my voice, they might listen to yours. The more people that we have in activism, the more people that we're going to reach, and the louder our voices are going to be. I'll see you next time.